Black smoke clawed at the sky, thick and oily against the blinding white of the valley. It rose from the wrecked remains of a lead armored truck, the hull split open like a crushed insect. Brass glittered in the snow. Trace of fire stitched the air in green and red lines, chewing into the last bits of steel and dirt that passed for cover. Rear Admiral Cole Moser slammed his shoulder into the side of a burning vehicle and stayed there, feeling the heat sear through his soaked parka. Snow hissed and melted around him as shrapnel pattered like hail. Somebody on the other side of the truck was screaming. "Keep your sectors," he shouted, voice level, clipped. "Blue 2, right ridge. Blue 3, left. Call out what you see." Rounds hammered the truck again, punching smoking craters in the engine block inches from his head. Moser flinched but stayed tucked, eyes working, counting shapes, angles, timing. Calm. He forced calm. Panic was contagious. So was composure. A corpsman's voice tore across the net, high and desperate. "I need help at. We've got. I can't stop the." His words dissolved into a harsh, grinding electronic growl. Not the usual fuzz of bad terrain. A thick, deliberate wash that smothered every syllable. "Say again. This is Viper Actual," Mercer said into his handset. "Coleman, sound off." Nothing. Just that same low, mechanical snarl crawling over every channel. The radios were dead. Mercer risked a glance over the hood. The valley opened in a shallow bowl, the road a narrow gray scar across the floor. On both sides, the land rose in steep, broken shelves of snow and rock, the ridges hooking over them. Enemy fire poured from up there, from half-hidden positions on the rim and from dark mouths in the rock. Machine guns, rifles, at least one heavy-caliber weapon punching bigger, angrier holes in armor. "Kill box," he thought. We drove right into a kill box. The convoy was pinned. The lead vehicle burned, blocking the road. Another truck near the center sat at a crooked angle, its front axle broken, flames licking from the wheel well. Men clustered in the wedges of shadow those hulks offered, returning fire in ragged bursts. The snow around them was already churned up and stained, red and brown and black. To his right, Chief Warrant Officer Dana, the designated marksman, lay sprawled beside his long rifle. Half of his face was visible, the other half buried in the snow. His eyes stared up, unfocused, lashes rimed with frost. Mercer didn't need a corpsman to confirm it. Dana wasn't getting up. "Blue 3, that sniper is eating us alive," someone yelled from farther down the line, voice thin with strain. "I can't move my team without." His words cut off in a wet grunt. A second later, a body tumbled from behind a wheel and landed face down in the snow. Across the valley, a squad of enemy fighters broke from their positions, bounding down the slope. They moved in leaps and slides, low and fast, covering each other with tight bursts. Professional. They weren't rushing in wild. They were closing in to finish the job, specifically, Mercer suspected, to finish him. "Stay in cover," he barked. "Do not expose to that sniper. Bravo team, prep to." A single shot cracked. It cut through the constant roar of the firefight, higher, sharper, like a lightning snap. The point man of the attacking squad pitched forward mid-stride, legs splaying as he slammed into the snow and slid several meters before coming to a stop. A dark bloom spread beneath him. Mercer blinked. That shot hadn't come from the obvious ridge lines. It had come from somewhere else. Another crack. One of the enemy's machine gun nests went suddenly silent. The gunner dropped backward, arms flung wide, the belt of ammunition still feeding into the now quiet weapon. The assistant gunner ducked, confused, then tried to swing the barrel himself. A third shot took him in the chest. "Where is that coming from?" someone shouted. Mercer didn't know. He followed the sound, but echoes bounced around the stone, deceptive. The source seemed to be nowhere and everywhere at once. Another measured report, and an RPG gunner, who just shouldered a tube, spun away, the rocket screaming wild into the rocks above his own side. It detonated in a spray of stone and snow, dropping two of his teammates in a white avalanche. The tempo of enemy fire changed. It faltered, reoriented. Heads ducked. The neat rhythm of their overlapping arcs started to fray. "Who the hell is that?" one of the SEALs yelled over the half-motored net, voice cracking between awe and terror. No answer came back, just breath, static, and that strange undertone, like some distant, hungry machine. The jammer was still working. Whoever was shooting wasn't talking. Mosa shifted, using a gap in the steam rising from his burned truck like a window. He scanned the ridges, the cliff faces, every ledge and outcrop he could see. Snow, rock, muzzle flashes, figures in white and gray, ducking, firing, shouting to each other. And then, a flicker, a tiny, dark shape, flat against a sheer face of stone nobody with sense would try to climb. Prone on a narrow shelf near what looked like bare vertical ice, a lone figure lay behind a rifle. No obvious path up, no ropes visible, just a human shape and a long barrel, steady as if welded to the rock. The next shot came a heartbeat later, and an enemy team leader dropped where he stood. Mosa's stomach did a small, disbelieving flip. That angle, that position, whoever that was, they'd gone somewhere he would never have assigned anyone, somewhere he hadn't even considered. A round slammed into the engine block next to his head again, showering him with steel fragments and stinging snow. He ducked back, heart thudding, mind working. The voice of the narrator in his memory was his own, but warmer, easier. A hangar, a different day. Rotor wash and laughter instead of smoke and screams. He saw it in flashes, a wide, echoing space, tools hanging in neat rows, a line of armored trucks shining under overhead lights instead of a gray sky. He remembered his own younger self, still with a bit more color in his hair, standing in front of a group of mechanics and drivers, and one of them, in the back, trying to disappear behind a toolbox. "You," he called, pointing with his coffee cup. "Wrench Turner. What's your call sign?" The mechanics around her had chuckled, a friendly ripple of amusement. She'd looked up, eyes wary, a smear of grease across one cheek. "I don't really have one anymore, sir," she'd said, voice low. "They used to call me Raven." Something in that tone, in the way a couple of the older NCOs had gone quiet, had tugged at him, but he brushed it aside in the moment. "Raven, who?" he'd said, playing it up, gesturing at a metal-streaked hands. "You all iron and ghost back there, Chief. Iron Raven. That's got a ring to it." More laughter. Someone had grabbed a paint marker and scribbled a crude bird silhouette on the side of a toolbox while the briefing moved on. He'd smiled, thinking he'd just given a shy mechanic a story to tell. Now, crouched behind a burning truck in a mountain valley that was rapidly becoming a graveyard, he heard another clean-shot echo from the high cliff. Another enemy fighter fell. Iron Raven. Mosa swallowed, jaw tightening. Back on the ridge, the prone figure shifted slightly, resettling behind the rifle. Breath fog in the thin air, rising in faint wisps before the wind tore it away. Out here, on a ledge nobody believed was reachable, a single shooter was rewriting the geometry of a carefully prepared kill box. To understand how that mechanic ended up there, how a nobody in grease-stained coveralls became the invisible hand keeping a flag officer's convoy alive, the story would have to rewind, back to that quiet morning, back to the hangar, back to the moment when a joke call sign turned into something else entirely. White morning, the quiet mechanic and the joke call sign. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world clean and cruel. Dawn crept over the high valley in shades of blue and iron. Snowdrifts rounded the edges of everything, buildings, berries, the long low shapes of parked trucks, softening their lines, hiding the hard steel beneath. Plows crawled through the motor pool, their broad blades scraping, engines growling in the cold. Breath steamed from Marines and sailors moving between rows of vehicles, their voices small and sharp in the thin air. In the middle of it all, Ray Navarro walked the line with a torque wrench. She wore faded coveralls and a parka zipped up against the bite. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense knot, a few strands stiff with frost where they'd escaped her beanie. Her hands were already raw around the knuckles, split from cold and degreaser, but they moved with efficient certainty. One truck at a time. She tightened the bolts on a gun mount, listened to the click, checked the play. She ducked to look at the underside of a wheel well, fingers tracing where ice had built up around a brake line. She squinted at a faint hairline crack in one of the side mirrors, internalizing it, filing it away. Nothing on her clipboard yet. This was the pre-pass before the official checks. Two younger Marines leaned against the hood of a nearby vehicle, coffee cups in hand, talking about home, about the game they'd missed, about some video one of them had been sent from back in the States. They laughed loud enough that the sound bounced around the bay. Ray listened without meaning to, picking up details, names, places. "You ever sleep?" "Navarro," one of them called as she stepped past. "Later," she said, not slowing, not looking up from the tires she was inspecting. They snorted. They all trusted her. They liked to joke that if Ray signed off on an engine, it would outlast the war. She smiled at that sometimes, a little. Mostly she just kept working. The quick montage of her morning was a pattern she'd fallen into without thinking. Check the mounts. Check the tracks of yesterday's plows. Check the little things people didn't notice when they were hurried, cold, or distracted. Tiny details meant big consequences when the road got bad or when someone started shooting back. She passed a truck and stopped, frowning. On the inside edge of the tire, the tread was worn more than it should have been. Someone had overinflated, or the last load had run heavier than logged. She made a note. "Replace Re-2, Vehicle 8, she wrote. If she didn't, nobody else would. The base's quiet murmur shifted as the first helicopter's rotor thump rolled over the valley. Heads turned as the aircraft descended, blasting loose snow in wild spirals. Ray shaded her eyes and watched it flare and settle near the operations building, skids biting into the ice. Crewmen hopped out first, unplugging themselves and ducking their heads as they ran. Then the passenger door opened, and Rear Admiral Cole Mercer dropped onto the pad, his parka hood down despite the cold, his eyes already scanning the base with a practiced sweep. He moved with the comfortable authority of a man who'd been in command rooms and on decks for half his life. His presence snapped the outpost into a slightly sharper focus. People straightened. Voices lowered. Even the plows seemed to drone a little more purposefully. Word spread fast. Mercer wasn't here for a social call. He'd come to personally escort a convoy, a portable encryption module and sensor gear that needed to get to a higher ridge station. Weather had kept their assets unreliable, and the only way to get the equipment where it had to go was by road. The briefing took place in the main hangar, because it was the only space big enough for the convoy crew, the security platoon, and the handful of specialists who would go with the Admiral. Engines ticked as they cooled from morning starts. The smell of oil and exhaust mixed with coffee and the faint metallic tang of snow melting on steel. Ray stood toward the back, half hidden behind a tall toolbox. She'd been dragged in to listen for vehicle concerns, and she did, eyes flicking from the map projected on a torque to the faces of the officers talking around it. Mercer noticed her in a gap between bullet points. "You," he said, pointing without malice, more out of a habit of engaging the room. "In the back. Wrench Turner. What's your call sign?" Heads turned. A few grins flashed her way. Ray felt heat crawl up under her collar despite the cold. She thought, briefly, about pretending not to have heard, but dodging a flag officer directly wasn't a habit she wanted. She straightened slightly. "I don't really have one anymore, sir," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "They used to call me Raven." The hangar's ambient noise seemed to dip. Two older staff NCOs exchanged a quick, sharp look, something like recognition passing between them. Mercer caught the flicker but filed it away for later, if at all. He saw a lot of faces, heard a lot of names. He had a mission to move. "Raven, who?" He let the word sit in the air a second, testing its feel. "You spend enough time in these rafters, you probably know this place better than the map does." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, stained and scarred. "All that metal you've been wrestling. Iron Raven. That works." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, lightening the room. Someone near her nudged her gently. Before she could protest, a Marine grabbed a paint marker off the nearest bench and sketched a rough Raven silhouette on the side of a toolbox, the lines wobbly but enthusiastic. Ray forced a small smile and ducked her head. The briefing rolled on. Mercer outlined the timeline. They had a small weather window before the next front moved in. The route would take them down the valley road, then up through a narrow basin between ice-coated ridges. The higher pass was closed from last week's slides. Drones were grounded more often than not by wind shear and icing. A cover would be on call, but uncertain. The usual disclaimers. Time and terrain were already squeezing them. They had to move now or accept a delay that would ripple through operations across the entire sector. From the back of the room, Ray studied the map. Her eyes traced the route through the basin, pausing at the way the ridge lines curved over it. She'd been out there before, during a summer months assignment when the mountain looked less like a death trap and more like a hiking brochure. She remembered old climbing bolts hammered into the rock from some long-ago training exercise, remembered goat tracks and narrow shelves that led to perfect vantage points. She also remembered yesterday's drone flight, the one the techs had been grumbling about. It had cut out early, not from weather, just gone, like something had reached up and switched it off. When the briefing broke, officers and senior enlisted clustered around the map to sort last details. Order of march, call signs, emergency contingencies. People peeled away in groups. Engines rumbled as crews started their pre-mission routines. Ray slipped around the group and approached the convoy commander, a lieutenant with a too-new look and a jaw clenched a little too tight. "Sir," she said quietly, "about the basin." He glanced at her, then back at his notes. "Yeah, engines all good, Navarro." "They will be," she said. "That route runs under a series of ridges with old bolted roots. Climbs. The rock outcrops form good cover, and yesterday's drone lost signal right over that pocket." He frowned, impatience shading into his expression. "We've run that road a dozen times. Intel's got it as low risk. We don't have time to reroute or rebrief everyone." "Yes, so, but," she hesitated, searching for language that would cut through his checklist mindset. If someone wanted to set up an ambush with Overwatch, that's where they would do it. He blew out a breath. The Admiral's schedule loomed over his shoulder like a physical presence. "Look, I appreciate your concern. Stick to the engines, Raven," he said, using the call sign like a gentle tap. "Routes above our pay grade. We'd know if that basin was hot." Ray's jaw tightened, but she swallowed the rest. "Aye, sir." She stepped back, nearly bumping into one of the older NCOs from the briefing. He looked at her for a long beat, something almost like apology in his eyes, then clapped her shoulder once and moved on without saying anything. The hangar thinned out. Ray found herself alone for a moment near the motor pool's side door. Outside, the sky was brighter now, the snow almost harsh in the sunlight. She could see the ridges from here if she craned her head, layered lines of white and stone, deceptively peaceful. She needed to do something with her hands. At the small range beside the motor pool, a designated marksman rifle sat on a bench, half disassembled from a cleaning session. Ray picked it up, slid the bolt home, and checked the optics like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody had told her to. She just hated sending anything out the gate that hadn't been touched by someone who cared. She stepped to the firing line and took a few slow shots at distant steel plates. The air bit at her cheeks, making her eyes water. She compensated without thinking, adjusting for wind, for the odd behavior of the barrel in the cold. Her shots rang true, crisp pings echoing back from far downrange. A young Marine wandering past paused, watching her. "Didn't know you could shoot like that," he said, eyebrows up. Ray cleared the chamber, set the rifle down. "I can tighten bolts too," she said lightly, trying to make it a joke. She didn't volunteer that the last time she'd carried a rifle like that in anger, it had been high up, on another mountain, with a different team. She didn't say that the nickname Raven had once meant something very specific. She'd buried all of that here, in the motor pool, under layers of oil and routine. Later, she stood beside the last vehicle in the convoy as engines came to life one by one. Diesel rumble rolled through the bay, mixing with shouted commands and the clank of gear. Snow outside glittered under full daylight, dazzling. Ray rested her gloved hand on the cold metal of the rear truck's door. The knot in her gut had been tightening all morning, but now it pulled hard enough to hurt. Her gaze kept drifting to the ridges above the valley road, to the basin she knew they had to cross. The Admiral walked past, climbing into his vehicle with an easy step. He spared her a brief nod, the respectful acknowledgement of a senior officer toward a competent specialist. No more, no less. Convoy, mount up, someone shouted. Ray climbed into the reed truck with the rest of the maintenance and support crew, the torque wrench hanging from her belt like a talisman. She pulled her headset on and settled onto the cold seat as the world outside narrowed to the view through the armored glass ahead. The knot in her stomach stayed where it was. She'd done everything she could from here. Checks, warnings, quiet shots on the range to make sure the rifle would do its part if someone needed it. The engines growled. The trucks rolled. The mountain waited. The basin turns to a trap, contact, and compounding crisis. The road out of the base began as a familiar ribbon of packed snow, flanked by berms and low walls. The world outside the convoy became a rhythm. White, rock, a flash of trees, then white again. Engines droned at a steady cadence. Radios crackled with routine check-ins. The cold crept into boots and gloves, numbing fingers despite the heaters. Ray sat by the rear hatch, headset snug over her beanie, one hand resting on the metal floor to feel the truck's vibrations. Little changes in pitch told her more than most gauges. So far, everything sounded healthy. She watched the ridgelines more than her tablet. In the clear morning light, the mountains seemed both beautiful and indifferent. She noted how sound carried, bouncing off rock faces, sometimes making a distant crow's call sound like it was right on top of them. Occasionally, she heard faint pops and snaps from above. Snow shifting, ice breaking. Normal, probably. Maybe. Navarro, you look like you trying to set the hillside on fire with your eyeballs, one of the guys across from had joked, breath puffing in little clouds. Just counting rocks, she said. How many? Too many. They chuckled. She didn't. As the convoy climbed, the valley narrowed. The road curved and began to dip, feeding into the basin she'd seen on the map. The walls rose around them, ridges sweeping up and over, the sky shrinking to a strip of pale blue overhead. From down here, the ridges felt taller than they had in the hangar. The rock outcrops looked sharper, teeth jutting through the snow. Ray could imagine figures tucked behind each one, watching. Convoy. This is Viper Actual. Mercer's voice came over the net. Calm, close. Entering the basin. Stay tight. Eyes up. Weapons free on PID. JTAC. Keep reaching out to higher. See if they can push a bird through this mess. Aye, sir, came the reply. Ray scanned the slopes. A small patch of snow above them was wrong. Slightly discolored where fresh powder had slumped over a darker layer. Nearby, something flashed, just a tiny glint, like sunlight off glass. An optic, or a stray beer bottle some bored soldier had tossed months ago. She leaned forward, pressing a hand to the driver's shoulder. Hey! The world detonated. The lead vehicle vanished in a rolling blast of fire and snow. Sound arrived a heartbeat afterlight, a concussive punch that slammed into the rest of the convoy. Ray's teeth clicked together painfully as the shockwave hit the reed truck, lifting it a fraction off its suspension. The lead armored hull flipped like a toy, landing on its side across the road. The truck immediately behind it swerved, tires skidding, then buried its nose in the drifted berm. The rest of the column jolted to a violent halt. What the? IED. Front. Someone shouted over the net, voice ragged. Shouts turned into a storm as enemy fire erupted from both ridges. Rounds tore down from above in disciplined bursts. Machine guns chattered, chewing into the tops of vehicles, throwing sparks and chunks of composite armor into the air. Rifles stitched tighter groups into windshields, doors, hatches. The sound was overwhelming. Sharp cracks, dull thuds, the whine of ricochets, the deadly wasp buzz of rounds zipping past. Ray's driver cursed, slamming the transmission into park as the truck rocked from impacts. Glass spiderwebbed in front of them. Get down, someone yelled. She dropped off the bench, knees hitting the floor. Heart pounding. Training took over. Her hands moved without waiting for orders. Outside, a rocket whooshed from the left ridge and slammed into a truck near the center of the column. The explosion hurled armor plates aside, spraying flaming diesel. Men tumbled from the back, some moving, some not. Contact left and right. Multiple positions. The convoy commander's voice cut through the chaos, clipped and too loud. Return fire. Return fire. Gunners swung their turrets up, spitting rounds toward the ridgelines. Some found targets, others chewed harmlessly through snow and rock. The enemy seemed to be everywhere at once. Ray heard that distinct, hateful sound, a high-caliber rifle, slow and deliberate amid the chatter. Each shot had weight. Each was placed. She saw one punch straight through a gun shield and dropped the gunner behind it. Another took a Marine in the shoulder as he tried to drag a buddy to cover. "Sniper! High right!" someone shouted, pointing. But pointing didn't help much when the sniper was better at this than any of them. The convoy commander reached for his radio, yelling coordinates, trying to bring in artillery and air. His voice broke up mid-sentence, dissolving into a smear of noise. "Say again, convoy. Your last transmission was unreadable," came a faint, distant reply. Then even that vanished under a rising, grinding buzz. Ray heard it as much as she felt it, a thick layer of static crawling over every frequency, blotting out call signs, codes, everything. Someone in her truck slapped the side of the radio in a reflex older than digital tech. It did nothing. "We're jammed," the JTAC spat from somewhere near the middle trucks. "They're sitting on us with a jammer. All channels dirty." Enemy rounds walked closer. A corpsman dashed from behind one wheel to another, trying to reach a wounded Marine. Halfway there, he jerked and fell, warmth spraying the snow around him. Someone screamed his name, scrambled out to reach him, caught another round in the leg, went down. In the re-truck, Ray watched the feed from a small external camera for as long as it remained intact. It showed the convoy from above, a narrow chain of steel in a bowl of white, with tiny black specks on the ridges pouring fire down on them. Black smoke from the lead vehicle smeared across the sky. The feed fizzled out a moment later as a round punched through the housing. The smell of burning fuel and cordite seeped into the cabin. A machine gun up front rattled harder and harder until the barrel glowed faintly even in the cold. The gunner kept the trigger down just a second too long. The weapon coughed, choked, then froze. "Guns down," he yelled, wrestling with it. "It's down, down, down." "Switch to the spare," someone ordered. "I can't." The feeds twisted. Chaos cascaded. Small things went wrong everywhere at once. A twisted feed here, a dropped magazine there, a knee that wouldn't bend because shrapnel had found it. The convoy's neat, rehearsed contingencies began to unravel under the pressure of a force that had clearly studied them. Ray snapped out of a frozen crouch. She scrambled to the rear hatch and slammed her shoulder into it. It swung open a crack, then jammed. Snow and debris had piled against it from the explosion. She kicked it with both boots, using the leverage of the floor, until the hatch grudgingly opened enough for her to squeeze through. Bullets slapped against the outside of the armor. One ricocheted off the hatch frame inches from her hand, making her fingers go numb. "Navarro, where are you going?" someone yelled after her. "Fixing things," she shot back, and dropped into the snow. The air outside was colder, harsher. The roar was immediate, unfiltered by steel. Ray hunched low and sprinted toward the nearest disabled turret, stumbling as the snow dragged at her boots. She slid behind a wheel, breath burning in her chest. The gun above her sat at a useless angle, its ring caught on a bent section of armor from the blast. The gunner inside cursed, trying to muscle it back around. "Hold still," Ray shouted up. She unhooked her torque wrench, jammed herself between the mount and the warped ring, and put all her weight into it. Metal groaned. Another bullet smacked into the side of the truck, showering them with powdered paint. Come on," she whispered. With a shriek, the mount popped free. The turret swung a few degrees, then more. Finally, Clay. "You're good," she yelled. "Bring it up." The gunner didn't need telling twice. He raked the ridge with a fresh burst, forcing several enemy heads down. Under the truck, Ray had a low, skewed view of the battlefield. From this angle, she saw things others missed. She saw how enemy fire concentrated not just on clusters of men, but on specific vehicles. The comms truck, marked by its extra antennas, the squad's technical with the hardened case bolted to the rear. Inside, the encryption module, triple-locked and supposedly anonymous. Ray followed the line of fire back up the ridge with her eyes, squinting through smoke and drifting snow. There, a boxy vehicle tucked just behind the crest, mostly hidden except for the slant of its roof and a long antenna stabbing into the sky. Exhaust puffed in faint, steady clouds. The sound of the static in her headset seemed to hum in sync with it. That's the jammer, she realized. That's what's choking us. Jammer's at 12 o'clock high, she shouted to no one in particular, pointing. Behind the crest, by the... Her words were lost in the whomp of a mortar round impacting behind the convoy. Snow and earth geezed up at the rear, slamming into the last truck and rocking it on its suspension. Another round landed short, then another long. Bracketing. They pre-registered this whole bowl. Someone yelled, horror in his tone. They are walking it in. From further up the line, Mercer's voice cut in, strained but steady. All call signs. This is Viper Actual. Maintain cover. Do not bunch up. Identify that sniper and shut him down. As if in answer, another precision shot whipped in from above, taking out a Marine who'd risked a look over the hood of his truck. He fell back in a spray of red that flashed almost black against the snow. Mercer himself took a hit a moment later. Ray saw him jerk and fall behind his vehicle, then rise again with one hand pressed to his side. The snow where his fingers touched darkened. He grabbed a nearby rifle and started issuing orders face to face, no longer trusting the jammed radios. Even so, without a marksman, without comms, without a way to silence the mortars, the convoy's options were narrowing by the second. Ray pressed her back to the tire, lungs heaving, heart thundering. Mortar blasts crept closer. Shrapnel hissed through the air. Men cried out. Someone was praying under their breath beside her. Someone else was humming tunelessly, on the edge of panic. She looked up. The cliff face loomed directly above the rear of the convoy, a sheet of stone and ice that seemed to go straight up. To anyone else, it would have looked impossible. To her, it was familiar. She could trace, in her mind, the line she'd climbed once for a maintenance run. Off duty, no rifle, just a pack of tools and a work order to fix a battered little weather sensor bolted high on the ridge. A slanting crack there, a hidden ledge behind that outcrop, a narrow chimney near the top. Hard, exposed, stupidly dangerous. But real. From up there, she'd been able to look down into the basin from a side angle she hadn't thought about in months. A view that now, in the middle of this kill box, burned in her memory with painful clarity. She blew out a breath that turned into a cloud and vanished. No one was going to order someone up there. Protocol wouldn't allow it. The climb was insane under the best conditions, and these weren't the best. But the jammed radios, the mortars, the sniper, the deliberate targeting of the Admiral and the encryption case, all of it pointed in one direction. Someone had to get to that ledge. Someone who knew the route. Ray tightened her grip on the torque wrench until her hand hurt, then pushed off from the tire. Mortar blasts pounded behind her as she ran toward the Admiral, toward the base of the cliff, toward the one choice no one expected her to make. Iron Raven alone, the impossible route. She found Mercer sheltering behind the charred remains of the second truck, his parka stained dark at the side. A corpsman had wrapped a field dressing around his waist, but it was already blotched through. He looked up as Ray slid in beside him, breath coming in white bursts. Enemy fire kicked at the snow around them, bits of ice stinging her face. "Sir," she shouted over the din, "I can get above them." He squinted at her, trying to place her through the smoke in his own pain. Above who? Them. She jerked her head toward the ridgeline that reared up behind the convoy. The sniper, the mortars, the jammer. There's a route up that face behind us. I've climbed it before. Maintenance run. Weather sensor. A nearby team leader, Master Sergeant Green, glared at her like she'd lost her mind. "That slope's a wall," he barked. "You die on the first 10 meters. "Not if you know where the handholds are," Ray shot back. "From the ledge, I can see into their positions. I can take their overwatch apart." Green's eyes flicked up at the cliff, then down at her coveralls, her mechanics patch, the torque wrench hanging from her belt. A bullet smacked into the hood inches from his ear, spraying them with paint and metal. "You're a mechanic," he said. "We've got shooters for that." Ray's gaze slid briefly to where Dana's body lay, half buried in the snow. His rifle, knocked aside in the blast, gleamed dully a few meters away. "Not anymore," she said quietly. "And your best shot is blind in one eye with shrapnel." He's not climbing anything. Mosa wiped snow and soot from his face with the back of his hand, eyes flicking between the cliff and her. Rounds kept hammering the truck, making their refuge vibrate. Another mortar blast walked closer, the concussion rolling through his bones. "You really been up there?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Ray said. "In summer. No snow. Still bad. But I know the route. Hidden ledge halfway, chimney near the top. If I can get there, I can see their sniper hide, their machine guns, the jammer truck, maybe the mortar pit. I can start punching holes." Green shook his head. "Even if she makes it halfway, sir, they'll spot her and cut her off the rock. It's suicide." Mosa's mind worked the problem. Stay here, and the mortars would finish bracketing them. The sniper would continue picking them apart. The jammer would keep air and artillery deaf. No conventional play was working. Procedure was failing them. He glanced toward the body of their marksman, then at the shivering JTC trying to coax any signal through the static. He tasted copper in his mouth, realized he'd bitten his tongue without noticing. "How good are you with a rifle, Chief?" he asked Ray. Her answer was steady. "Good enough." A fragment of memory floated up, her voice back in the hangar. "They used to call me Raven." The older NCO's silence. The way she'd moved on the range when she thought nobody was watching. He exhaled once, long and slow. "If you make it," he said, "and you can do what you say, you might change this. You might be the difference between us walking out or not." She nodded. "Understood, sir." He grabbed her sleeve before she could launch herself upright. "You do not die on that wall, Navarro," he said. "That's an order." "Copy," she said, though they both knew orders didn't mean much on an ice face under fire. Green still looked unconvinced, but he wasn't blind. He'd seen her morning on the range. He'd watched the cliff. He knew the clock they were on. Finally, he cursed under his breath and shoved a fresh magazine into her hand. "Take Dana's rifle," he growled. "You're not going up there with just a wrench." Ray scrambled through the snow toward the fallen marksman. Bullets snapped overhead, flinging up bursts of powder. She slid the last couple of meters on her knees, grabbed the rifle with numb fingers, and slung it over her shoulder. The weapon felt heavy and familiar at the same time, like an old burden settling back into its groove. She snatched up his spare magazines from his vest, stuffing them into her pockets and pouches. She grabbed a small coil of climbing line and a handful of carabiners from a cargo kit dumped half into the snow. Her hands found a roll of tape, a multi-tool, a couple of small wrenches. Without thinking, she pocketed them. Old habits. "Navarro," someone shouted. "You sure about this?" "No," she called back, breathless. "That's why it might work." She used the smoke from the burning trucks as a moving screen, darting from shadow to shadow. The mountain face loomed ahead, a dark wall veined with ice. At its base, a shallow notch offered the only real access. She dove into it, plastering herself against the stone as rounds smacked into the snow around her. Up close, the climb looked worse than it had in her memory. Snow had filled some of the cracks she'd used before. Ice had thickened others. The air felt thinner here, sharper in her lungs. She took a second, just one, to close her eyes. The noise of the battle receded slightly, muffled by the rock. In the relative hush, other sounds crept in. The faint whistle of wind, the distant boom of a mortar impact, the soft drip of meltwater somewhere above. In her mind, she replayed the maintenance climb. Sun on her neck instead of snow in her face. Chatter from the team below instead of screams. She traced the handholds, the ledges, the places she'd almost slipped. Her right hand found the first hold, fingers digging into a narrow crack. Her left searched and settled on a nub of rock. Her boots bit into rough stone, slipping slightly until she shifted her weight just right. She started to climb. The first 10 meters were the worst because they were the first. Every move felt like a decision to abandon any semblance of safety. The world below shrank with each upward step. Snow crust broke under her boots, spilling tiny avalanches down past her knees. Twice, lumps of ice tore free and bounced off her thighs, stinging through the fabric. "Ray, you're insane," she muttered to herself, using the sound of her own voice as a tether. The rifle on her back pulled at her balance. The line clipped to her belt snagged once, nearly yanking her off. She stopped, braced against the cliff, and freed it with shaking fingers. As she moved higher, the sound from the basin grew more distant and distorted. Gunfire became a dull, constant crackle. Mortar blasts were thunder somewhere below the horizon. Every gust of wind carried flurries of snow across her face, sometimes so thick she couldn't see her next hold. During one of those gusts, she made the mistake of looking sideways. The valley spread out beneath her like a white bowl splashed with soot. The convoy looked smaller from up here, the trucks closer together, the men reduced to dark dots. A shell landed at the rear, blooming into a dainty orange flower. Even from this height, she thought she heard someone scream. Her stomach lurched. Her fingers spasmed. Memories slammed into her. Another mountain. Another climb. A team roped in below her, the radio crackling with overlapping orders. A distant figure placing charges where they shouldn't. Her scope filled with black rock and a sliver of exposed fabric. The perfect shot. The one she didn't take in time. The blast that followed had triggered an avalanche that devoured most of her team in seconds. She heard again the instructor's voice from sniper selection afterward. "Cool and clinical. You're not built to pull the trigger when it counts, Navarro. That's not a moral judgment. It's a tactical one. We can't afford hesitation at that level." She squeezed her eyes shut, fingers digging into the rock hard enough to hurt. For a moment, she was back there, snow roaring, rope pulling taut, then going slack. Breaths ragged, chest locked. Below her now, in the present, another mortar landed. The shockwave shuddered up through the cliff, shaking her out of the memory. Not this time. She pressed her forehead lightly against the stone, feeling its cold kiss. Fear wasn't going anywhere. It lived in her bones. But fear and function could coexist. They had to. "Move," she whispered. One hold, then another. She did. Hand, foot, foot. Repeat. She leaned into the rock, letting it carry some of her weight, angling her hips to keep her center of gravity close. She used tiny edges most people would never see. Her fingers went numb, but she trusted the shape of the stone, the way her boots bit in. Visibility waxed and waned with each gust. In the whiteout moments, she froze, clinging to whatever she held, breath shallow, counting 3 slow heartbeats before moving again. The snow hid her from anyone looking up, but also hid the hold she needed. Protective curtain, suffocating veil. Halfway up, she hit her first real problem. Her scope lens, exposed just enough to catch the wind, began to fog and ice. A delicate film formed over the glass, then crystals, turning clear view into warped light. At the same time, her climbing line, dragged over a sharp rock edge, started to fray. She felt the difference in how it moved against her hip, heard a faint, ominous rasp. She swore softly. With her left hand wedged deep into a crack, she let go with her right just long enough to fumble a small wrench from her pocket. She held it between her teeth as she pulled herself up to a slightly more secure stance. She hammered the wrench into a narrow seam in the rock, turning it into an improvised piton. It held, barely. She clipped the line through it, taking pressure off the frayed section. It wasn't pretty, wasn't by any manual, but it might keep a fall from becoming a plummet. For the scope, she tore a strip of tape from the roll on her belt with clumsy, cold-numb fingers and laid it over the lens, leaving just a tiny, clean slit near the center. Crude, but better than trying to chip ice off under fire later. Below, through patches in the drifting snow, she caught glimpses of the convoy's struggle. A truck now fully ablaze. Men dragging someone on a makeshift sled made from a door ripped off its hinges. Figures on the ridge still moving confidently, coordinating. Mosa stood out only because she knew where to look. Near the center, upright when he was able, hunched when he needed cover, his gestures sharp, directing what pieces he still had. He kept glancing up toward the cliff she was on, as if trying to see a person clinging there. He'd bet their survival on someone he'd once teased in a hangar. She wasn't about to let that be his last bad call. The next stretch of rock tilted inward slightly, giving her a little more comfort even as the holes grew smaller. She could feel ice through her gloves, slick and treacherous. She kicked at a patch, breaking it away, then jammed her boot into the wet crack it left, using friction more than edges. Finally, lungs burning and arms shaking, she pulled herself onto a narrow ledge. It was barely wider than her shoulders and sloped outward just enough to make lying prone awkward. But from here, crawling cautiously to the edge, she could see the enemy's positions unfolded below her like a map. On the far ridge, the sniper hide was a low, carefully sculpted mound, the barrel of a long rifle just visible under a net of snowy burlap. Two machine gun nests sat on slightly lower shelves, their fields of fire overlapping the convoy's position. Nearby, an RPG team hugged close to a rock spur, waiting for an opening. Off to one side, behind the rim, the jammer truck she'd glimpsed before sat with its engine idling. A thick antenna jutted into the air. A man in a heavy coat hunched over a tablet beside it, eyes fixed on the screen, headphones clamped over his ears. Closer to the bull's edge, a small mortar team worked in a shallow pit, adjusting elevation, checking range cards, loading rounds. They moved with the smooth ease of repetition. They practiced this a lot. Ray let the scene bane itself into her mind. Force multipliers, coordination nodes, kill chains. For a moment, she just lay there, chest rising and falling, the cold seeping through her clothes into her skin. Her hands trembled, not just from exertion. This is what you were running from, she thought. The vantage point, the decisions, the shots that mattered. Well, running only works until the mountain catches up. She rolled onto her side, unslung the rifle, and settled behind it, the stock fitting into the hollow of her shoulder like it had never left. The tape slit over the lens gave her a narrow, surprisingly clear field. Good enough. She drew a slow breath. Let it out. The world narrowed to crosshaze and wind and distance. Below, the convoy bled. Above, on the ledge no one had believed reachable, Iron Raven chambered her first round. Iron Raven's reversal, target ladder and enemy counterhunt. Through the narrowed circle of her taped scope, the chaos below resolved into clean lines and recognizable patterns. Ray swept from left to right, cataloging. Sniper first, the long barrel barely protruding from the hide, the spot where a curl of breath fogged under the netting every few seconds. Next, just below and to the side, the radio spotter, tucked behind a rock with a small notepad in hand and a handset jammed against his ear, calling corrections to mortar and machine gunners. Two machine gun pits, staggered on a diagonal, one covering the center of the convoy, the other raking the rear. Each had a gunner and an assistant, backs bent, movements crisp despite the cold. Closer to the bull's lip, the RPG team crouched, one man with a tube, another with a pack of rockets in the snow beside him. They shifted restlessly, wanting a better shot. The mortar crew, in their scooped-out position, moved like clockwork. Load, fire, adjust, repeat. One man read from a board, another handled the tube, another stacked rounds. Behind them, the jammer truck squatted like a beetle, antenna quivering slightly in the wind. The operator at the tablet occasionally glanced up at the basin, then back down, adjusting something, watching whatever interference pattern he'd built hold steady. Further back, partially shielded by a rock, a man with a distinctive armband barked orders, gesturing with one gloved hand. The way others deferred to him, the number of radios pointed in his direction, marked him as command. Ray built the target ladder in her head without conscious thought. Sniper, spotter, machine guns, RPG, mortar control, command, jammer, mortar tube if she had rounds to spare. And always keep an eye on anything that moved differently. Runners, messengers, anyone carrying papers or a different weapon. She let the crosshays come back to the sniper. The first shot had to change the rhythm. She let her breath out until her lungs felt empty, then squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the report sharp even up here. Her ears rang, the sound echoing off the rock at her back. Through the scope, She saw the sniper jerk as if yanked by an invisible wire. The barrel kicked up, then sagged. The netting over the hide fluffed and then fell still. Snow around him darkened slowly. Below, in the basin, several enemy fighters flinched at the unexpected shot. One looked toward the convoy, assuming a lucky marksman had rallied. Another turned, confused, trying to pinpoint the origin. Ray rotated the rifle a fraction, brought the spotter into his sights. He was halfway through speaking into his handset, mouth open, eyes on the mortar pit. The bullet took him just above the collar of his coat. He folded sideways, the handset dropping from his hand and swinging on its cord. The mortar crew paused, looking up, suddenly leaderless. Ray shifted again, muscles in her shoulders protesting. She found the nearest machine gun nest. The assistant was leaning forward, feeding the belt, the gunner hunched behind the shield. She put her first round into the gunner's exposed shoulder, the impact spinning him away from the weapon. The assistant's hands reflexively tightened on the belt as he tried to grab the grip with his free hand. She corrected half a mil and fired again. The assistant fell backward, legs kicking once, then still. The gun lay unattended, its barrel smoking in the cold air. Below, men in the convoy shouted as the torrent of rounds from that direction abruptly ceased. One of the pinned-down Marines half laughed, half yelled, "What the?" They just stopped. On the opposite ridge, the RPG gunner stood, tube on his shoulder, eyes fixed on the last mobile truck in the center of the column. His loader slid a rocket into place, slapped the back of the tube, and ducked. Ray swung to him, feeling the second stretch. She exhaled, fired. The round hit just as he pulled the trigger. The RPG veered violently, the exhaust blast kicking him backwards. The rocket slammed into the rock a few meters to his left, exploding in a shower of stone. A fragment hit his loader in the thigh, spinning him into the snow. The misfire sowed instant confusion. Shouts rose from that cluster, some fearful, some angry. Up on the ridge, a squad leader reacted fast. He grabbed one of his men by the collar, dragging him toward cover, and pointed down toward Ray's general direction, shouting orders. He triangulated the fact that the new fire wasn't coming from the basin. Someone had a high flank. Ray saw him gesture sharply to two fighters nearby, young, lean, geared lighter than the rest. They nodded and broke off, moving along the ridgeline to where a gully cut down toward her ledge. Climbers, flankers. At the same time, a small quadcopter drone lifted from behind a rock near the jammer truck, its rotors buzzing angrily as it climbed. It rose just above the ridge, then started angling toward her position, camera eye glittering. They were adapting. Fast. She wanted to keep working the ladder. There was another machine gun, the mortar still functional, but the drone was a more immediate threat. If it found her, she'd be silhouetted, pinned, and dead in seconds. She forced herself to wait until the drone reached a slight hover, its motion less erratic as the operator drew it into a steady recomposition. She traced back along the angle of its movement, quick mental geometry. The drone's line of travel, the way it crabbed in the wind, pointed back toward a cluster of rocks near the jammer. There, a figure standing slightly apart, hands on a controller, visor tilted up. One shot, two possible targets. If she missed, the drone would still find her. If she hesitated, the climbers would be closer. Fear pressed behind her ribs. Her fingers felt thick. Function anyway. She chose the operator. The drone's path depended on human hands. She fired. The man at the tablet jerked, arms spasming, the controller tumbling from his grip into the snow. The drone wobbled, rose a meter, lost its orientation, and then spun, its blades clipping each other. It dropped like a stone, disappearing into the basin's churned whiteness. Ray checked her magazines almost automatically, counting rounds. She'd burned more than she wanted already. She had to make the rest count. Down below, the mortar crew had resumed action without the spotter's corrections, but their rounds fell wider now, less precise. Still deadly if they got lucky. She sighted on the man holding the range board, lips moving as he tried to recalibrate. She took him. The board dropped from his lifeless hand, clattering onto the rocks. His partner looked from him to the mortar, confusion slicing through his focus. Her next shot cracked the rim of the tube, hitting the gunner's arm. He screamed and fell back, clutching the limb. The mortar went silent as their makeshift crew collapsed. From the convoy, the marginal relief was palpable, even from her distant vantage point. Men scrambled from one shattered cover to another, dragging wounded toward relatively safer pockets. A gun truck at the rear reversed, their nose into a position where it could fire uphill, no longer suppressed by accurate sniper and mortar fire. In the broken mesh of static in the JTAC's headset, a faint voice cut through for half a second. "Say again, troops in contact." He seized on it. "Break, break. This is Hammer 1-4. Troops in heavy contact. Grid." His words dissolved again, but some of it had gone through. Enough, maybe, for someone overhead to start looking. Ray's next shots were shorter, less dominant. Small corrections in a battle still very much in motion. She took a runner carrying a tube of rockets. She clipped the leg of a fighter attempting to emplace a new machine gun. She refused to waste rounds on anybody not actively influencing the kill box. On the ridge, the climbers had made progress. They were now halfway up the gully that led toward her ledge, using ice axes and crampons to move faster than she had. They had the advantage of rope and dedicated gear. They'd reach her in minutes if she did nothing. She stole a glance at them through the scope. The lead climber's face was hidden behind goggles and a balaclava. His movements were precise, practiced. This wasn't his first mountain either. She considered trying to take them now. But shots at steep angles on moving targets, with the tape-limited scope, risked misses she couldn't afford. Instead, she shifted her sights to the command figure near the jammer. He'd stepped out from behind his rock now, rage visible even at this distance. He shouted at his fighters, gesturing toward the basin, toward the gully where the climbers ascended, toward the burning trucks below. His body language screamed urgency. This plan was slipping from his fingers, and he knew it. From down in the bowl, Mercer saw him too. The Admiral had propped his back against a ruined wheel, rifle across his lap, one hand pressed to his wound. He watched the command figure's agitated movements. "Whoever's up there," he muttered, mostly to himself, "I hope you see him too." On the ledge, Ray exhaled slowly. The next bullet was the kind he'd told her she wasn't built to fire. The kind that would decapitate a plan, collapse an attack, save or cost lives far beyond the immediate kill. She squeezed the trigger. Through the scope, she saw the commander jerk, legs folding. His arm, frozen mid-gesture, dropped limply. He crumpled in the snow, radios dangling uselessly. The fighters nearest him stared for a half-second, stunned, then broke into competing responses, some rushing to his side, some looking wildly around, some shouting conflicting orders. The neat choreography of the ambush dissolved. On one part of the ridge, a group began pulling back, retreating toward the rear in fits and starts. On another, a more fanatical cluster surged forward, firing as they advanced, desperate to complete at least part of their mission. Reach the Admiral, seize the comms case, drag someone, anyone, down the slope as proof. Enemy breaking. Green yelled from below. Some falling back, some still pushing. Moses sensed the shift like a drop in air pressure before a storm changes course. "All squads, this is Viper Actual," he bellowed. "Exploit those gaps. Blue 2, cover the wounded and secure the package. Blue 3, push to that rock outcrop and deny them the Admiral. Gun trucks, adjust in new fields of fire." Men who had been frozen in place by fear and suppressive fire felt the weight lift a fraction. They moved, not wildly, but with purpose. A fire team dashed out, grabbed the hardened encryption case, and hauled it behind more solid cover. Another team shifted to a low ridge of plowed snow that gave them a cleaner angle on the remaining attackers. Ray ran a quick calculation. Distance to the gully. Time for the climbers to reach her. Rounds left. She was down to her last magazine. Each shot now was a choice between immediate threats and future ones. A technical truck on the enemy's side, until now hidden behind an outcrop, roared to life. It emerged onto the slope, bouncing over rocks and snow, heading on a diagonal line that would bring it down toward the basin's edge and, if allowed, toward Mercer's position. Two men stood in the bed, one with a light machine gun, the other with his eyes fixed on the Admiral. A kidnapping team. Even if the main ambush had failed, grabbing a wounded flag officer would salvage something from the wreckage. Ray's scope snapped to the truck. She took the driver first. The bullet entered through the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass. The vehicle jerked, fishtailing. A second shot hit the gunner in the bed, knocking him backward. The technical veered, tires losing purchase, then slammed nose first into a rocky outcrop. It stuck there at a crooked angle, blocking the last clean path into the convoy center. Her magazine felt lighter. She ejected it, catching it with mittened fingers, and counted the remaining rounds. Not many. Enough for one more critical action. The jammer had been partially shielded from her angle by the commander's position. With him down, she had a better line. The truck's antenna loomed in her sights, a thin metal rod that represented the difference between isolation and reinforcements. She steadied, aimed at the base where metal met electronics, and fired her second-to-last round. The antenna snapped, sparks flaring from the mount. The boxy casing below shuddered. The operator, already dead, slumped further, his hand sliding off the wrecked tablet. In the JTAC's ear, the static cleared like a curtain thrown open. "Read you now, Hammer 1-4. Say again your grid." He didn't waste the miracle. He rattled off coordinates, bearing, enemy strength, friendlies in close proximity, his voice tight but clay. Above the cloud cover, an A-craft banked, changing course. A pilot looked down at his display, saw the numbers, and throttled toward the basin. Ray's last round sat in the chamber. She hesitated only long enough to scan the battlefield. The climbers had closed another 10 meters, now within shouting distance if the wind had carried right. One slipped, recovered. They hadn't spotted her exact position yet, but they would soon. She could save the bullet for them, or she could use it on one more piece of the enemy's structure below. Her eyes fell on the mortar tube. The crew was broken, but another fighter had stepped in, dragging around toward it with grim determination. Even a single well-placed shell, if one of them figured out the angle again, could end Mercer or crack the cover where the wounded now lay. She made the decision. The final shot rang out. The round hit the mortar tube just as a new crewman tried to slide the shell in. The impact cracked the metal near the base and knocked the round from his hands. It tumbled into the snow, harmless, for now. The tube sagged, warped. Even if they scrambled to repair it, it wouldn't fire straight again. Her rifle was now a very long, very cold piece of metal. She exhaled, emptied of options in one sense, full of responsibility in another. She lay still for a second, feeling the tremor in her arms. A faint roar grew overhead. Through a gap in the clouds, she caught a glimpse of gray wings banking. "Aircraft on station," the JTAC's voice came, triumphant. "We have eyes." The pilot's voice followed. "Tally smoke, tally hostiles. You boys look like you've been busy." Attack runs weren't an option this close to friendlies without risk, but shows of force were powerful on their own. The jet screamed over the ridge, low and fast, the noise alone a weapon. Fighters on the enemy side flinched, ducked, some throwing themselves flat. Under that auditory hammer, more of them began to fall back, scrambling up and away from the basin. The few diehards who still pushed downward did so haphazardly, their cohesion shattered. Down in the bowl, the convoy survivors gathered themselves into a rough defensive arc, covering each other's withdrawals from the most exposed positions. Green led a team to retrieve the last reachable wounded. Mercer staggered once, nearly fell, then steadied as a Marine shoved a shoulder under his arm. "Look up, sir," the Marine said, nodding toward the cliff. Mercer did. The silhouette on the ledge was small, almost lost against the rock, but now that he knew where to look, he could see her. She lay flat, no muzzle flashes now, just a dark shape against darker stone. "Who is that?" a young SEAL asked, or in his voice. Mercer breathed once, feeling the ache in his ribs, the bane of the wound in his side, the sticky chill of blood in his clothes. He remembered the hanger, the toolbox, the paint marker. the way the word had tasted in his mouth when he'd thrown it out as a joke. Iron Raven, he said softly. The name passed from mouth to mouth among the battered survivors, acquiring new weight with each repetition. On the ledge, Ray keyed her now-clear radio, voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. "This is Overwatch," she said. "Targets engaging in withdrawal. No more mortar capability. Jammers down. I'm out of rifle ammo. I can spot for you from up here." "Copy, Overwatch," the JTAC replied immediately, adopting the call sign without question. "We've got eyes in the sky and an angel on the cliff. Let's finish this." The last of the enemy fire tapered off under the combined pressure of air presence and ground regrouping. The climbers, halfway up their gully, paused, looked at the jets streaking by, and made the smart choice. They began backing down, movements hurried, no longer hunting, only trying to survive. Minutes later, the basin fell eerily quiet. Ray lowered her head onto her forearm, breath fogging in small, exhausted bursts. Her fingers throbbed. Her shoulders screamed. Her fear, for the moment, had nowhere else to go and so simply settled inside her, heavy but not crushing. Below, across the churned and blooded snow, men began to stand. They looked up. For the first time since the ambush began, she let herself look back at them as people and not just shapes, as the lives she'd been balancing on each ounce of pressure on the trigger. She raised a gloved hand in a small, tired wave. It was enough. Debrief in the snow, cost, identity, and the echo of Iron Raven. By late afternoon, a soft snowfall had started again, blanketing the scars in the basin with a fresh, thin layer. Steam rose from the blackened hulks where trucks had burned down to their frames. Medics moved carefully, marking the bodies that would be moved later and the gear that still might be salvaged. Medevac helicopters churned the air, coming and going from a makeshift LZ down valley. Each departure carried away another cluster of wounded, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale against olive drab. Back at the forward base, the motor pool had transformed into a temporary aid station. Stretcher lines crowded the lanes where trucks usually idled. Tables meant for parts now held full bags and med kits. The sharp smell of antiseptic fought a losing battle against fuel and blood. Ray sat on an ammo crate in a corner near a stack of tires, hands bandaged, knuckles swollen. The corpsman had scolded her for the state of her fingers, split, raw, some nails torn from the rock, but had said nothing about the rest. He'd just given her a tired nod and moved on to the next patient. She watched snow accumulate on the high windows, flakes clinging briefly before sliding down. Her body hummed with a bone-deep fatigue that felt almost hollow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crosshays settling on another silhouette. Heard each shot again, felt the weight of each decision. In a cramped briefing room nearby, Mercer sat at a table littered with maps, notepads, and captured enemy equipment. His side had been properly bandaged now, jacket off, shirt stained but clean around the wound. Pain sat under his skin like a live wire, but he pushed it aside as best he could. An intel officer clicked through images on a laptop salvaged from the jammer truck's operator station. Another sifted through waterproof paper maps and a notebook taken from the dead commander. "Sir, this wasn't a hasty ambush," the intel officer said. They had convoy routes mapped out, timetables annotated. "Look here, notes on your inspection schedule over the last month." They knew when you tend to visit forward posts. Someone fed them information, or they've been intercepting our traffic at a higher level than we thought. Mercer frowned, leaning in. The notes were meticulous. Times, dates, call signs, cross-references to standard resupply routes. They positioned that jammer exactly where it had strangled both our ground comms and uplink attempts, the officer continued. Combined with pre-registered mortar tubes on the basin and a dedicated kidnap squad, this wasn't about harassment. It was a snatch attempt. You and the crypto module were the prizes. They'd have had a propaganda field day with a captured flag officer and cutting-edge encryption tech. The room went quiet for a beat under the weight of that. Without the jammer going down and their leadership getting cut out as fast as it did, the officer added, "They probably get you off that mountain alive, sir. And we spend the next year trying to clean up the mess." Mercer nodded slowly. The image of the technical grinding toward his position flashed behind his eyes. The way it had suddenly careened into the rocks, empty. Instead, he said, they walk away with dead, broken equipment, and a story they won't want to tell their sponsors. He stood with a small grunt, biting back a hiss as his wound complained. Where is Navarro? Motor pool, sir, Green answered from the doorway. She refused a cot, said she wanted to stay with the trucks. Mosa found her where Green said she'd be. She looked smaller out of armor and harness, just a slender figure in stained coveralls sitting amid stacked tires and chains. Her gaze was far away, somewhere between the snow outside and the cliffs beyond it. Chief Navarro, Mercer said. She blinked, refocusing, then lurched halfway to her feet. Sir. Sit, he said, lowering himself onto the crate opposite her. Doctor says I'm not supposed to stand more than I have to anyway. She sank back down, awkward, hands folded in her lap to hide the bandages. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. In the hangar, earlier today. All of it. She shook her head. You don't. Yes, I do. His tone brooked no interruption. I took a look at you, at the grease on your hands, and decided you were a joke I could use to loosen up a room. I saw the way those older NCOs looked when you said your old call sign, and I ignored it. That almost cost us everything. She looked at the floor, jaw working. You climbed an ice wall under fire, he continued. You took the one angle they didn't account for. You pulled apart a professional ambush. You gave us comms when we were deaf, and time when we were out of it. That's not luck. That's something else. Ray swallowed. The words landed heavy but didn't sit comfortably. I just did my job, sir, she said softly. Both of them, I guess. He tilted his head. Both. She hesitated. The weight she'd been carrying for years shifted, uncertain. They used to call me Raven on a mountain team, she said eventually. Back when my job was to see things first and end them before they got big. We were on an operation. Different mountains, different war. Spotter called a man placing charges in a bad spot. It was my shot. If I'd taken it faster, the blast wouldn't have triggered an avalanche. Her voice thinned but didn't break. I hesitated. Just half a breath. Wanted a cleaner PID. Wanted to be absolutely sure. Snow came down. We lost most of the team. I walked out of it intact. Physically, anyway. She rubbed her bandaged hands together. I washed out of sniper selection after that. Instructor was right. Hesitation at that level costs lives. I asked to be reassigned to maintenance. Figured if I kept engines running and bolts tight, I could keep people alive without deciding, personally, who didn't get to go home. Mosa listened without interrupting, expression sober. Climbing that ridge today, she said, felt like walking back into the moment I've been avoiding ever since. Same cold, same angle, same feeling in my chest. I was scared out of my mind. Still if I'm honest. He nodded once. But you went. Somebody had to, she said. And I didn't freeze this time. She drew a shaky breath. I remembered every face in that basin. It didn't make it easier, but it made it clearer. Fear had its say, then the job had its tone. He sat with that for a moment. You know, he said quietly, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do alongside it. Whatever happened back then, whatever shot you didn't take, today you did something most people couldn't. Or wouldn't. He straightened slightly, wincing. So here are your options, he said. Option 1. You get a formal commendation. We write your name into every after-action report, and we start the paperwork to put you back on a recon or sniper track if you want it. Option 2. You stay in the motor pool, away from command boards and promotion boards, and you let this thing we now call Iron Raven turn into a story people tell to make themselves feel braver. She huffed a small, tired laugh. Thought admirals hated giving people choices, she said. We hate giving bad ones, he answered. These aren't bad. They're just different roads. She glanced toward the bay doors, where she could see the shapes of wounded trucks being towed in, burned hulks that would either be stripped for parts or rebuilt piece by piece. I'm still a mechanic, she said finally. This place, this work, it makes sense. Things break, you fix them. There's satisfaction in that. But if something breaks somewhere no one else can reach it, She met his eyes. You know how to find me now. He held her gaze for a long beat, then nodded. Fair enough. I'll make sure the paperwork reflects what you did either way. And if you ever decide those ridges are where you belong more than this bay, my door's open. He stood, grimaced, and offered a hand. She took it, her bandaged fingers disappearing in his. You earned that call sign today, he said. It's not a joke anymore, if it ever was. After he left, small changes began to ripple through the base. Someone repainted the rough raven silhouette on her toolbox, neater this time, solid black on gray metal. A crew chief unrolled a rifle case in the armory and stenciled Iron Raven on the side in careful letters, setting it aside on a separate shelf. Nobody said much about it. They just made space. Guys who'd once only called her Navarro or Hey, Chief started using Raven again, quietly, without the teasing edge. Conversations dipped when she walked past, not out of discomfort, but out of a new, thoughtful respect. On the third evening, she climbed the stairs to the motor pool roof alone. The sun was sinking, painting the snow in blue and gray. The ridges across the valley stood dark against the sky, their teeth outlined in fading light. Somewhere up there, faint and almost invisible, was the narrow ledge where she'd lain behind the rifle. She wrapped her arms around herself and listened to the distant thump of helicopter rotors, the occasional clank of metal from below. The air tasted clean, if still edged with a memory of smoke. Call signs, she thought, were usually given in passing, out of some offhand joke or a single moment. Rarely did they arrive fully earned. Yet sometimes the worst places carve them into you like grooves into stone. Her radio, clipped to her shoulder more out of habit now than necessity, crackled softly. A voice she didn't recognize came through, tired but steady. Overwatch, this is Patrol Alpha, it said. We're heading into that basin you and the Admiral made famous. Could use eyes if you're not busy. She smiled despite herself, a small, private thing. Her thumb pressed the transmit button. This is Iron Raven, she replied, her tone calm, professional, and without a hint of self-consciousness. I copy. Send your route. Let's keep you out of the bad spots. On the other end of the net, there was no laughter, just relief. Somewhere down below, men who'd been in the basin that day exchanged glances. The call sign they'd once heard in a hangar as a punchline now carried the weight of survival, of a ledge in the snow, of a woman who had climbed back into her own fear and done the job anyway. Above them all, the ridges watched, silent and cold. Ray stood there on the roof, eyes on the mountain, listening as the patrol's icon appeared on her tablet, as their voices threaded through the net. The memory of the day's shot stayed with her, a scar she'd carry. But it didn't feel like an open wound anymore. It felt like a mark, a line drawn between who she'd been and who she was now. Iron Raven copies, she said once more into the falling dusk. No one smiled at the phrase. No one had to. Respect answered back in the silence that followed.